Deep within the dark, damp corridors of the underground labyrinth, the main character walked further forward into the shadows, his footsteps carefully stepping over the lifeless bodies of defeated monsters that lay scattered across the cold stone floor. He silently reflected on how every single creature he had encountered on this current floor was nothing more than weak and useless trash. A soft, glowing illumination slowly lit up his face as he stepped out of the narrow passage and entered a much larger chamber. In the exact center of this spacious room stood a formidable monster. The main character stared directly at the creature and immediately activated his appraisal skill to analyze its strength. The magical display revealed that the beast before him was the legendary Crazy Mantis, a dangerous entity classified at an extraordinary danger level of SSS. The monster remained perfectly still, locked in a tense stance, and completely ready to strike at any moment. Surprise filled the main character as he contemplated this shocking information, wondering how a mere creature here could possess an SSS danger rating when even the mighty Demon Lord was rated only as an S-rank menace. He silently questioned what could possibly be wrong with the scaling and logic of this entire labyrinth. Before he could process the thought any further, the Crazy Mantis launched a violent and sudden attack with incredible speed. The main character reacted instantly, swiftly dodging out of harm's way before the razor-sharp limbs could tear into him. Taking swift action, he raised his gun, aimed it straight at the terrifying beast, and pulled the trigger without wasting a single second. As the battle raged on, a sudden thought crossed his mind about how, before arriving in this harsh underground world, he had been living a completely ordinary and peaceful life as a normal high school student back in Japan. The heavy bullet tore through the air and struck the monster's limb with devastating force, severing the heavy arm entirely in a single instant. Taking advantage of the opening, the main character leaped high into the air, gracefully soaring over the beast to land directly behind its back, where he immediately fired his weapon once again. The Crazy Mantis let out a high-pitched screech of pure agony. Fueled by rage and pain, the monster wildly lashed out behind itself in a desperate attempt to counterattack. However, before its strike could make contact, the main character fired another powerful shot. A much louder and sharper scream echoed through the chamber as dark blood sprayed wildly across the floor and walls. In his inner thoughts, the main character realized that everything from his past life had already become a distant and faded memory. Despite the distance of time, those painful memories resurfaced vividly in his mind, carrying him back to his former high school days. In those days, 17-year-old Takeda Junpei found himself standing all alone in the school courtyard as a group of aggressive male classmates surrounded him from every side. Takeda Junpei stood trembling in the middle of the circle, his voice shaking uncontrollably as he tried to apologize to the aggressive youth named Kido Shouta, explaining that he did not have the money they were demanding. The leader of the group instantly cut him off, declaring that a simple apology was nowhere near enough to settle the matter. Kido Shouta chimed in aggressively, reminding everyone that they had clearly agreed on the sum of 50,000 yen being paid on that exact day. Yelling in frustration, Kido shouted that if the weak boy did not have the cash, he should just go out and steal it like a proper thief. Without giving any warning, Kido violently slammed his heavy foot directly into Junpei's stomach. The brutal impact caused the helpless boy to gasp for air in intense physical agony. A cruel smirk appeared across Kido's face as he remarked that since the money was missing, they would instead give him a beating worth at least 50 yen. Junpei's face distorted in intense terror as the entire group closed in and began to beat him relentlessly. As the terrible pain flooded his body and mind, Takeda Junpei bitterly accepted that this miserable routine was simply his everyday reality. Kido Shouta and his terrible group of vile friends would constantly corner him and inflict cruelty upon him, completely destroying his simple dream of experiencing a normal, peaceful second year of high school. Suddenly, a clear voice called out from nearby, interrupting the violent assault by demanding to know what they were doing. The bullies paused as a girl named Tatsumiya Noriko stepped forward, standing firm and watching the scene with deep concern and anger. Ashamed of his helplessness, Junpei quickly diverted his eyes away from her, which only caused Noriko's eyebrows to furrow even deeper in distress. One of the bullies scoffed at her sudden appearance, complaining that she was always getting in their way. He mocked Junpei, laughing at the idea that such a weak and useless piece of trash always needed his self-proclaimed wife to rescue him from danger. Completely ignoring the cruel taunts of the group, Noriko firmly took hold of Junpei and pulled him safely away from his attackers, telling him that they were leaving together. The group of bullies laughed loudly behind their backs as they walked away, yelling out a final warning for Junpei not to forget the money the next time they met. Meanwhile, Kido gritted his teeth in silent anger as he watched the two walk away down the empty hallway. After walking in silence for a short moment, Junpei finally broke the quiet atmosphere, telling Noriko that she did not need to get involved in his personal troubles. He explained that just because they happened to be childhood friends, it did not mean she was obligated to burden herself with his private problems. Noriko quietly responded by bringing up a distant memory that he might have forgotten, reminding him of a time long ago when he had bravely stepped in to save her when she was being bullied by others. Because of that past act of kindness, she explained that she could never bring herself to simply turn a blind eye to his current suffering. Noriko looked at him gently and reassured him that he was actually a genuinely strong person deep down, and that she truly understood who he really was. She declared that even if everyone else in the entire school grew to hate him, she would never hate him. She softly asked that they share and carry this heavy burden together from now on. Her sincere words left Junpei completely speechless and stunned into absolute silence. As her heartfelt message sank deep into his heart, he finally realized that nothing in his miserable life would ever change unless he made the conscious decision to change himself first. He resolved in his mind that, even if it was only by a small amount, he had to become stronger for Noriko's sake. Without warning, the sudden approach of the aggressive group from behind cut directly through Takeda Junpei's inner thoughts. Kido Shouta demanded that Junpei hand over the cash immediately, explaining that he had suddenly changed his mind and wanted his money that very day. Junpei gasped in sheer nervousness as terror seized him once again. At that exact moment, the physical space surrounding all of them began to shift and warp dramatically, causing both Kido and Junpei to gasp in utter disbelief. The entire atmosphere and everything around them distorted into completely unnatural shapes. Inside his mind, Junpei shouted in total panic, desperate to comprehend what was happening as his vision became thoroughly twisted and broken. When they finally opened their eyes, the surrounding environment had completely changed into an unfamiliar place. Expressions of profound confusion, dread, and nervousness were clearly visible across all of their pale faces. One of the men panicked, asking what had just happened and where in the world they were now located. Suddenly, a calm voice interrupted their rising panic, proposing to explain the entire situation to them. A young boy appeared directly in front of the group out of thin air. The jaws of everyone present dropped wide open in complete surprise and horror. Nervous sweat poured down Kido's face as he struggled to process the boy's calm demeanor. The mysterious youth merely offered a wicked smirk in response. Fueled by rage and extreme confusion, Kido charged angrily toward the boy, screaming at him to answer his question and demanding to know where they were. The boy responded with total calmness, stating that while he understood the reason behind such a violent outburst, he found the loud noise rather annoying. In a split second, Kido gasped as his face was suddenly sliced open and twisted violently, causing him to cry out in agonizing physical pain. Before anyone could react, his entire head exploded into pieces, spraying thick blood in every direction across the area. Noriko's face froze in absolute horror, while the rest of the men stood completely paralyzed by shock. Only the mysterious boy smiled, his lips curving into a sinister grin. Junpei wiped the warm blood off his face and gasped in horror as he stared down at his stained fingers. Pure panic filled his mind as he tried to process the reality of Kido's missing head, the splattered blood, and the scattered brain matter floating around them. Full realization hit him like a heavy blow, and sheer terror spread across his pale face. Noriko let out a shocked, terrified scream. Then, with a simple snap of the mysterious boy's fingers, Kido's exploded head instantly restored itself as if the horrific event had never happened. Kido gasped in total bewilderment, completely unable to process his sudden resurrection. Noriko and Junpei stood frozen in place, their mouths hanging open in sheer disbelief. Kido fearfully asked what kind of monster the boy truly was. The boy smirked and noted that he had not yet introduced himself to them properly. He casually revealed that he was the supreme creator of the world they inhabited, declaring himself to be a literal god. The divine entity added that he had originally been a normal human being, but roughly 3 billion years had passed since he first achieved godhood. He clarified that the exact number of years might be slightly inaccurate, as so much time had elapsed that he had long since lost count. He casually mentioned that even supreme beings face their own unique troubles, such as the burden of being completely incapable of dying. Because of his eternal existence, he constantly had to invent new ways to pass the time, explaining that he was currently extremely bored and possessed endless free time to spare. The entire group fell into a terrified, heavy silence as the entity continued his explanation. He stated that he had decided to come up with a brand new method to kill his overwhelming boredom, which was to transfer all of them into a completely different world. Junpei reflected in his thoughts that not a single person present could utter a single word in response, which was entirely natural given the absurd and unbelievable nature of their situation. The divine entity explained that the world he was sending them to existed within another dimension, a place commonly known as a beta fantasy world. In that realm, the powerful kings of major nations frequently utilized ancient summoning magic to bring forth desired heroes to fight for them. For this reason, he had granted permission for that specific summoning magic to be used directly on their group. Noriko hesitantly spoke up, her voice trembling with intense emotion as she admitted that none of them could truly understand what was happening around them. She desperately begged the entity to let them return home, pleading that all they wanted was to live a normal, quiet life. The entity's demeanor instantly hardened, and his face darkened into a terrifying expression. He firmly rejected her plea, asking why he would ever send them back when he had just explained how bored he was. Junpei's eyes filled with deep terror as he observed the entity's changing expression, recognizing in his thoughts that this was not the peaceful look of a god, but rather the horrifying face of a completely broken and twisted deviant. Junpei also observed that Kido's group was desperately trying to process the horrifying reality of their situation. The divine entity then turned his attention directly toward Junpei, stating that he would ask only once whether Junpei had been able to understand everything explained up to this point. Junpei carefully replied that he understood more or less. Satisfied with the answer, the entity decided to continue with his explanation. He instructed everyone to observe the floating magical status displays that had suddenly appeared directly in front of them. The entity revealed that numerical levels and ability points were the fundamental standard laws in the fantasy world they were about to enter. He pointed out that an average human being possessed roughly 50 health points and 20 ability points, suggesting that everyone could easily determine their own relative worth and strength by using those basic numbers as a reference point. Kido let out a sharp gasp of surprise before his expression shifted into a confident smirk, realizing the immense potential behind his new status. Glancing down at his floating status window, he observed his assigned class listed as Magic Warrior at level 1. The divine entity overseeing the scene confirmed his thoughts, praising Kido's impressive set of initial abilities. Turning back toward his companions, Kido inquired about their respective statuses. The deity noted that while their capabilities did not quite match Kido's extraordinary setup, they were still quite decent overall. When another student pointed out an ultra-grade designation listed at the end of their skill lists, the god explained that this was a special gift granted to every summoned individual before the start of their journey. He revealed that ultra-grade represented the absolute highest tier attainable for any skill, urging them to utilize such power wisely. Satisfied with his own strength, Kido approached Junpei to inspect his numbers. The moment Kido peered into Junpei's status display, he burst into uncontrolled laughter. Grabbing Junpei roughly by the head, Kido mocked him relentlessly, declaring that his abilities were utterly pathetic. Clamoring to see the embarrassing view for themselves, the rest of the gang crowded around to read the screen, which displayed Junpei's job as none at level 1. The group erupted into hysterical laughter, ridiculing him for being so weak that he lacked even a basic class assigned to his name. Stepping beside Junpei, the deity interjected to clarify that possessing no assigned job or attribute meant Junpei retained complete freedom over his growth. Unlike others who unlocked abilities naturally as they leveled up, Junpei would instead need to defeat enemies directly and claim their abilities as his own. Hearing this, Kido's brow furrowed in annoyance as he admitted that such a condition sounded shockingly powerful if used correctly, a sentiment Junpei privately agreed with. However, the god pointed out the massive catch to Junpei's situation, questioning whether he had the actual capacity to defeat dangerous foes entirely on his own, especially since powerful monsters carrying rare skills were exceptionally scarce. Chuckling darkly, the divine being remarked that setting an unwinnable trial was boring, offering Junpei a piece of vital information. With an evil smirk, the god revealed the existence of a treacherous labyrinth teeming with abnormal monsters, suggesting that whatever Junpei sought might be waiting at its depths. Overwhelmed by the ominous warning, Junpei's eyes filled with sudden dread. Turning toward Noriko, who stood staring blankly into the distance, Junpei called out her name. Without flinching, she muttered quietly that while Kido and the others were treating this summons like an exciting game, the reality of the parallel world would likely prove terrifyingly brutal, leading to horrific deaths. Yet, after a brief silence, she added that everyone had no choice but to rely on Kido, given his vastly superior stats compared to the rest of the group. She gently encouraged Junpei to work hard alongside everyone else, though her words only caused nervous sweat to break out across his pale face. Before anyone could process their situation further, the god cheerfully declared the start of their journey. The surrounding space fractured and shifted dramatically, plunging the stunned group into transdimensional transit. As they vanished, the divine entity privately anticipated how the jobless skill hunter would navigate his harsh fate, wishing him a safe trip. Meanwhile, unnoticed amidst the chaos, Noriko's status screen reflected a condition just as powerless as Junpei's, listing her job simply as a villager girl. The supreme divine entity's astonishing words continued to echo deeply inside Takeda Junpei's mind, reminding him of the terrifying creature who claimed to be the ultimate creator of their original universe, a literal god who possessed the absolute authority to transfer all of them into a completely different world. Right after those dark memories faded, The gentle and clear voice of Tatsumiya, Noriko, resonated warmly within his thoughts, recalling her heartfelt promise that even if every single person in the entire world grew to hate him, she would never hate him, encouraging him that they should work hard and carry their heavy burdens together. Without warning, the sudden heavy impact of a farming hoe slamming into the hard dirt ground jolted Junpei completely back to the present moment, cutting off the fragments of past memories that had been surging wildly through his head. All of a sudden, a familiar voice called out to him from nearby, asking if he had a moment to spare. Junpei quickly responded that he would be right there, recognizing that it was Noriko speaking to him. He reflected in his private thoughts that a considerable amount of time had passed since their sudden arrival in this mysterious foreign land. Upon entering this world, they had been formally summoned directly by the ruling king of the kingdom, who explained that the military forces of all neighboring nations were composed of powerful summoned heroes. The ambitious king had initially held extremely high expectations for their group's potential combat power, but despite those grand hopes, their group ultimately failed to demonstrate any remarkable abilities and suffered defeat. Realizing that they were nothing more than useless trash without any practical value, the disappointed monarch completely gave up on them and cast them aside without mercy. The king's guard dumped their entire group onto the dusty dirt road just outside a remote border village, effectively banishing them forever from the prosperous capital city. Junpei anxiously glanced around at his immediate surroundings and admitted in his inner thoughts that the local village inhabitants looked at their group with cold, hostile gazes every single day. Because their unexpected arrival coincided with a severe famine that was already starving the community, the local residents viewed them as nothing more than extra useless mouths to feed during a crisis. Understanding their delicate situation, Junpei recognized that the absolute least they could do to survive was to offer their physical labor to the community, which was why he personally worked tirelessly every day plowing the tough agricultural fields under the blazing sun. Junpei repeatedly reminded himself in his heart that he had to work hard and truly change his weak nature for Noriko's sake. After a brief pause in their task, Junpei suddenly exclaimed in absolute shock, unable to believe the word sacrifice that had just been spoken. Noriko offered a weak, sad smile and confirmed the truth of his outburst. She reminded him of the initial warnings given to them by the locals when they first arrived in the border settlement, specifically how the primary cause of the severe famine plaguing the region was a dangerous magical labyrinth located nearby, which required regular offerings of living human sacrifices to appease its malevolent forces. Junpei quickly countered that while he remembered the rumor, such a terrible burden was supposed to be a serious concern for the native villagers themselves, meaning it should have absolutely nothing to do with their group of outsiders. Noriko acknowledged the truth of his statement, agreeing that they were indeed complete strangers to the village. However, she softly explained that among their entire summoned group, her personal status numerical values were by far the lowest, rendering her practically useless in terms of labor or defense. She added that the chosen sacrifices never actually volunteered for such a grim task, but because her status was so terribly low, she was viewed by the community leaders as the absolute perfect candidate to be given away. Junpei felt completely speechless at her calm words, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of horror. Noriko continued her explanation, stating that the village elder had already officially selected her for the ritual, leaving her with virtually no choice or authority to refuse the command. Junpei muttered in utter disbelief, insisting that such an awful outcome could not possibly be allowed to happen. He urgently suggested that they pack their belongings and escape from the settlement immediately, declaring that she did not have to suffer such an extreme fate. Noriko gently shook her head and explained that running away was simply not a viable option for them. She reminded him that they had been officially placed in this specific location by the direct royal decree of the king, meaning that if they selfishly abandoned their assigned duty and ran away, they would instantly be branded as hunted criminal fugitives throughout the realm. Furthermore, she pointed out that they had absolutely nowhere to run or hide in this vast, unknown world, and if the royal authorities or local guards ever caught up to them, every single member of their group would be executed on the spot. Junpei stared directly into her eyes, completely unable to utter a single word of protest against her sound logic. Noriko then put on a bright, reassuring smile and gently told him that everything would be completely fine. She reasoned that simply being designated as a sacrifice did not automatically guarantee her death. She explained that the ritual merely involved throwing the chosen individual directly into the entrance of the sacrificial labyrinth, a place filled with completely unknown dangers and wild beasts. She bravely insisted that she would not die inside the dark maze, promising him that she would survive the ordeal no matter what happened. Upon hearing her brave words, Junpei froze completely in place as an intense emotion surged through his entire body. He tightly clenched his trembling hands into firm fists and looked her straight in the face, declaring firmly that he would never allow her to go through such a terrible nightmare. He stated with absolute resolve that he would step forward and become the sacrifice in her place. Noriko gasped loudly in utter surprise, her eyes widening in disbelief at his unexpected declaration. Suddenly, a distinct rustling sound came from the dense bushes located directly behind them. Both Junpei and Noriko quickly turned their heads toward the source of the unexpected noise, spotting a familiar figure standing in the shadows. Junpei muttered the name of Kido Shouta in surprise. Kido stepped forward and apologized for listening in on their private conversation, explaining that he had accidentally overheard everything Junpei had just said. In his private thoughts, Junpei reflected on how Kido had completely stopped his cruel bullying behavior ever since their group was banished to this impoverished remote village. Junpei believed that this positive shift in behavior was primarily due to Kido joining the local village vigilante defense force, a responsible duty that seemed to have curbed his old aggressive tendencies. However, Junpei had also noticed that Kido had appeared deeply troubled and anxious over the past few days. Kido called out to Junpei, observing with a quiet tone that Junpei had truly transformed into a completely different person ever since they arrived in this foreign world. He worked earnestly every day, and he knew that. And now he's volunteering to be a sacrifice? Kido asked if he's an idiot or what. Kido slowly closed his eyes in deep shame, and for the very first time, he sincerely apologized for all the cruel bullying and physical abuse he had inflicted upon Junpei in the past. Junpei fell into a complete, stunned silence upon hearing the unexpected apology from his former abuser. Kido then tentatively suggested that perhaps they really should consider gathering their belongings and running away from the village together after all, regardless of the heavy risks involved. However, Noriko firmly raised her voice and insisted once again that she was the one who had been chosen as the sacrifice, so she must be the one to go. Junpei immediately shouted back with absolute firmness, refusing her insistence and declaring once more that he would be the one to enter the dangerous labyrinth. Noriko softly called out his name in deep concern, but Junpei looked back at her with unyielding determination. He reminded her of the moment back in their old world when she told him that they had to do their absolute best together, explaining that from that exact moment onward, he had made a solemn vow in his heart that he would change his weak self for her sake no matter what cost he had to pay. Ever since that pivotal moment, Takeda Junpei had consistently pushed himself to do his absolute best in everything he undertook. Looking at Noriko with a small, reassuring smile, he declared that he would not die and would definitely find a way to survive the upcoming trial. He added with firm confidence that they would undoubtedly meet each other again once everything was over. Following their emotional conversation, the small group met with the other young men to discuss the situation, and together they all set off on foot toward the location of the notorious labyrinth. Eventually, the ominous structure came into full view in the distance. Staring at the massive entrance, Junpei muttered softly under his breath as the group halted before the looming archway. The unnerving and eerie atmosphere surrounding the structure filled everyone's eyes with visible dread and apprehension. Taking a cautious, hesitant step forward, Junpei led the way into the darkness, with the rest of the group following slowly behind him in complete silence. He came to a sudden halt right before the threshold marking the inner perimeter of the maze. Kido spoke up from behind, pointing out that the painted white line on the stone ground clearly marked the official boundary of the entrance. He then turned to Junpei and asked if he was truly certain about going through with this dangerous sacrifice. Junpei fell into a heavy, contemplative silence. Noriko stepped forward and softly suggested that perhaps she should be the one to go instead, but Junpei firmly rejected her offer once again. Turning back to look at them one last time, he requested that Kido take good care of Noriko in his absence. Kido agreed to the request without hesitation. Nervousness flooded Junpei's eyes as intense thoughts raced through his mind. He realized that from this point onward, he would be trapped inside the terrifying sacrificial labyrinth, wondering silently whether he would ever be capable of coming back out alive. However, summoning every ounce of his remaining willpower, Junpei took a resolute step forward, shouting fiercely within his mind that he refused to die here, promising himself that he would survive for the sake of Noriko and everyone who had come to see him off. Suddenly, Noriko called out his name loudly from behind. She began to explain that in this world, there existed a legendary labyrinth filled with bottomless ravines and gaping, endless chasms. Junpei's eyes widened in confusion at her sudden change in topic and tone. Noriko continued her explanation, stating that the mysterious structure had suddenly appeared thousands of years ago, becoming the direct cause of all the catastrophic disasters and misfortune plaguing the world ever since. She added that it was widely known as an impregnable fortress, noting that numerous famous, high-ranking adventurers had dared to challenge its depth in the past, yet not a single one of them had ever returned. Raising her voice into a harsh scream, she declared that saying he would return alive was nothing more than a foolish fantasy, as the actual survival rate was absolute 0%. Confused and alarmed, Junpei asked her what she was suddenly talking about. Completely ignoring his question, Noriko continued her speech, revealing that according to extensive observations conducted by the magic research institutions of the royal capital, scholars had concluded that the labyrinth did not actually belong to this world at all. A cruel smirk slowly formed on her lips as she added that once a person stepped beyond the boundary line of the entrance, they were no longer existing within this world or their original universe, but were instantly transported to an entirely different dimension altogether. She shouted that this was precisely why this specific location so close to the border settlement was officially designated as the sacrificial labyrinth. Junpei froze in utter shock and disbelief as her terrifying words sank into his mind. Then, without any warning, Noriko suddenly leaned over and passionately kissed Kido right in front of Junpei's eyes, leaving the helpless boy to exclaim in total shock at the unbelievable sight before him. The surrounding men immediately broke into loud, triumphant cheers, shouting that their plan had succeeded completely as their harsh laughter echoed wildly throughout the area. Kido scoffed mockingly, offering an insincere apology to Junpei while revealing that he and Noriko had secretly decided to start dating a few days prior. He sneered that simply forcing him into the labyrinth would have been meaningless unless the sacrifice willingly volunteered for the task himself, which was why they had orchestrated this entire elaborate performance to fool him into stepping forward. Kido mockingly asked if simply running away from being chosen as a sacrifice would not have been far too boring of an outcome. Noriko chimed in, clarifying that while the village elder had indeed originally selected her to be the sacrifice, she and Kido had quickly come up with this alternative strategy together to swap her place with his. Junpei's entire body began to tremble violently from the overwhelming wave of uncontrollable emotions crashing over him. Kido continued his harsh taunting, taking full credit for the idea and stating that this was the only possible way a useless person like Junpei could ever be of any actual benefit to him. He cruelly pointed out that while Junpei and Noriko possessed similar low numerical status points, anyone with common sense could see that a trashy, worthless boy like him was completely expendable compared to the value of a woman's body. Struggling to comprehend the horrifying reality, Junpei finally found his trembling voice and asked if every single gentle word and promise had been nothing more than a cruel lie. Without a single second of hesitation, Noriko coldly confirmed that it was all a complete lie. Heavy tears began to well up in Junpei's eyes as he desperately asked her how she could do this, reminding her of her previous promise that she would never grow to hate him. Noriko scoffed in amusement, responding that while she certainly did not hate him, she did not care for him or like him in the slightest either. Junpei cried out in deep emotional agony, bringing up her past declarations about protecting one another and helping each other overcome their struggles. Noriko mocked his desperation, pointing out that those idealistic words were easily spoken when they were still living in absolute safety. Her lips curved into an insidiously sharp smirk as she told him that once a person finds themselves trapped in a truly terrible situation, they quickly realize that such sweet promises are nothing more than meaningless garbage. She expressed genuine disbelief that he had actually been foolish enough to volunteer to die in her place, sneering at his unbelievable weakness. She sneered at his kind nature, shouting at him that true problems in the real world could never be solved with soft emotions, concluding that in realistic terms, he was nothing more than a complete, hopeless idiot. As her brutal words shattered his heart, tears flowed uncontrollably down Junpei's pale face. Kido yelled out at the top of his lungs, telling Junpei that he had heard enough, commanding him to step over the line and go die inside the labyrinth. Without warning, Kido violently kicked Junpei forward, sending him crashing helplessly onto the cold ground directly across the white boundary line. At that precise moment, a solid wall slowly began to rise and form between them, sealing off the entrance. Inside his panicking mind, Junpei screamed in shock at the sight of the rising barrier. Kido smirked cruelly down at him, declaring that he and the rest of the group would be making their escape immediately. He boasted that given his superior numerical status, even the most skilled pursuers sent by the kingdom would never stand a chance at capturing them. Scoffing loudly, Kido bade a final farewell to Junpei. Noriko joined in on the cruel parting, coldly thanking Junpei for providing her with so much amusement, mockingly noting that this would be the very last time he would ever get to bully him. Junpei's eyes filled with unbearable emotional pain and hot tears as the crushing reality of their total betrayal shattered his heart. His mind went completely blank, overwhelmed by the sudden loss of everything he believed in. Sometime later, Junpei muttered silently to himself, realizing that he had no clear memory of what occurred immediately after the doorway sealed him inside the darkness. He had simply continued to walk forward on total instinct through the pitch-black corridors, completely numb to his surroundings. Eventually, he snapped back to awareness and noticed an open door standing at the end of a long hallway. With eyes filled with a turbulent mix of sorrow, hatred, and confusion, Junpei took a cautious step inside the chamber. Waiting silently in the exact center of the vast, dimly lit room, a terrifying monster stood positioned and ready for his arrival. The vivid memories from a short while ago resurfaced inside his mind. Junpei reflected that until that pivotal moment, his thoughts had been completely blurred, but the instant he saw the terrifying sight before him, his mind cleared up entirely. Staring forward, he cried out in horror, demanding to know what kind of monstrous creature stood in front of him. He remained frozen in place, his nerves stretched to their absolute limit as he confronted the beast. Suddenly, the voice of the divine entity echoed clearly in his mind, reminding him that the special analytical ability was a personal gift granted to all of them. Reacting quickly, Junpei shouted the command to activate his appraisal skill. Instantly, a brightly glowing status window appeared floating in the air directly over the creature. The floating display revealed the monster's title as the No-Life King, also known as the Undead King, marking its danger rank at an extraordinary SS level. Junpei panicked internally, desperately wondering what an SS danger level truly implied for his survival. As he took a hesitant step backward, a sharp cracking sound echoed beneath his feet. He looked down and muttered to himself that the stone floor was extremely thin and fragile, barely able to support his weight without breaking. The moment he raised his head back up, he froze in total shock. The Undead King had already closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. Junpei let out a scream of pure horror. Before he could turn his body to run away, the monster's massive blade swung down and tore violently across his back. Explosive, excruciating pain surged through his entire body. His feet lost their footing, and his body staggered forward before crashing heavily onto the ground. As he landed face down, his eyes widened in sheer horror upon realizing that the floor beneath him was littered with scattered human bones. At that exact second, with a loud and echoing crack, the weakened floor completely gave way beneath his weight. Junpei's eyes remained wide with terror as he plummeted downward into the dark abyss. As he fell deeper into the pit, he could still see the dark silhouette of the Undead King growing smaller and farther away above him. Slowly, his heavy eyes opened again. He thought to himself in extreme shock, realizing that he was somehow still alive. Remembering his terrible injury, Junpei immediately checked his back to inspect the wound. To his absolute astonishment, the torn skin on his back was slowly closing up and healing itself completely. Confused and disoriented, he asked himself what kind of strange place he had landed in. He noticed a softly glowing circle surrounding his body as he sat rested atop a massive mountain of ancient corpses. Suddenly, a strange object caught his attention on the ground. He reached out and picked up a metallic card, wondering aloud if it was some kind of ancient slate. He muttered under his breath that he could not read the strange writings carved into its surface. Out of nowhere, the projection of a man suddenly appeared from the card, laughing cheerfully and welcoming him. Junpei flinched violently in surprise at the sudden appearance. The man in the projection chuckled, stating that he assumed Junpei must feel completely bewildered to find himself inside such a crazy dungeon. The man immediately clarified that this message was a recorded letter, meaning they could not hold a real-time conversation. He explained that he was simply leaving behind some helpful advice as an experienced adventurer who had explored this dangerous place before him. The man suggested starting with a quick self-introduction, though he laughed and noted that he probably did not need to state his actual name. He shared that his personal character level was somewhere around 200. Considering that the world's greatest master swordsman was rated at roughly level 300, he boasted that he was quite powerful in his own right. He explained that he possessed two key abilities, retrovision and appraisal, which had allowed him to successfully navigate and conquer parts of this labyrinth. Listening to the recorded message, Junpei realized in his thoughts that this entire location was extremely bad news. The man explained that he had spotted the dangerous monster instantly using his skills. He warned that because the upper corridors were so narrow, the creature would easily locate anyone if they made the slightest bit of noise. However, the man added that even within such a lethal environment, a safe zone like this one existed. He admitted that he did not fully understand the logic behind it, but the idea of a specific zone where monsters were strictly forbidden from entering and where all physical wounds automatically healed sent a genuine chill down his spine. Junpei nodded in realization, understanding that he was currently resting inside one of these mysterious safe zones. The man then shifted the topic of conversation back to the terrifying creature above. He sighed, explaining how helpless an encounter with that monster truly felt. He detailed that not only did the beast attack relentlessly with its massive scythe, but it also possessed the terrifying capability to completely nullify all physical and magical attacks directed at it. The adventurer explained that the monster's official appraisal description explicitly stated that standard attacks were rendered entirely ineffective. Using his retrovision skill, he had personally verified this claim to be absolute truth, confirming that normal attacks were completely useless against the beast. Junpei pondered in deep dread, wondering what kind of invincible entity they were dealing with. The man concluded his recorded message by advising whoever found the card to always leave behind any new information they gathered about the monsters for future adventurers who might fall into the pit after them. He mentioned that through his retrovision, he had actually witnessed the monster being defeated a few rare times in the past. Junpei gasped in sudden surprise at this revelation. The man clarified, however, that every single time the beast was slain, a massive area of effect explosion magic erupted in the middle of the chaotic battle, making it completely impossible for him to see the exact method used to defeat it. Junpei fell into a heavy, thoughtful silence. The recorded projection finally gave a stern piece of advice, suggesting that the safest and smartest choice was simply to find a way to escape from this terrible place altogether. The old man instructed Junpei to head directly toward the east, where he would find a heavy door containing a staircase that led straight up to the next level. He urged Junpei to run toward that exit with every single ounce of physical strength he possessed, emphasizing that his very survival depended entirely on his speed. The man added that although his current location offered absolute safety for the time being, remaining there indefinitely would inevitably lead to severe hunger and an agonizing death by starvation. Offering his final words of farewell, the man abruptly vanished from the surface of the glowing slate, leaving the quiet lower area completely still once again. Junpei muttered softly to himself that the strange old man had somehow managed to calm his frayed and panicked nerves despite the terrible situation he found himself in. Shaking off his lingering hesitation, Junpei stood up onto his feet, fully recognizing that staying put meant guaranteed death by starvation. So moving forward was his only real option. Evaluating his immediate physical surroundings, Junpei deduced that he was currently positioned directly beneath the powerful and terrifying creature. Looking upward into the darkness above, he reasoned that he should be able to scale the nearby tall pillar to return to the upper floor. He carefully mapped out his next steps in his mind, knowing that once he successfully climbed back up, he would have to make a desperate, frantic sprint toward the exit door. Although he harbored deep uncertainty about whether he would actually succeed in reaching the door alive, he possessed no other viable choices available to him. A quiet, dry laugh escaped his lips as he pondered what would await him if he managed to survive this harrowing ordeal, ultimately coming to the simple conclusion that nothing else mattered as long as he made it out alive. A sudden realization caused Junpei to fall completely silent and pause in deep thought. He recalled using his appraisal skill on the monster earlier, remembering that while normal physical and magical attacks were rendered completely useless against it, its actual health points were surprisingly low and its physical body was extremely weak. He questioned how a creature could possibly be considered weak if no conventional attacks could harm it, gritting his teeth as he forced his mind to analyze the strange contradiction. He reminded himself that his life hung entirely on the critical decision he made in this exact moment, telling himself to think as hard and as fast as possible. He questioned why a creature with such a fragile body and low health points could be so remarkably difficult to destroy, wondering about the exact mechanics behind its ability to nullify incoming damage. Recalling the detailed contents of the letter he had read earlier, he reasoned that if those words were accurate, a specific method to defeat the monster had to exist. He pondered the exact conditions required for victory, carefully running through various tactical scenarios in his mind, including the complex interactions of area of effect magic, chaotic group combat, and massive explosions. A sharp gasp escaped him as the realization suddenly clicked into place within his mind. He reasoned that under normal battlefield circumstances, such a creature could be easily eliminated during a massive, chaotic battle involving large-scale collateral damage and widespread explosions. However, standing completely alone in this place, he lacked the means to create a chaotic multi-person battle on his own. As he cast his gaze upwards searching for alternatives, his eyes widened in utter shock as he spotted an object positioning itself directly above. He gasped aloud as he realized the true answer had been positioned right before his eyes the entire time. The surrounding environment presented the exact conditions necessary to secure a decisive victory against the creature. Recognizing that just a slight bit of effort could allow him to defeat the monster once and for all, he realized he had no choice left but to see the dangerous plan through. Yet, just as confidence and momentum built within him, Junpei abruptly froze as a sudden wave of hopelessness drained the resolve from his expression. He cautioned himself against acting recklessly, urging his mind to abandon the fight and focus solely on escaping the area rather than engaging in a dangerous gamble. He tried to convince himself that the next level might contain weaker, more manageable enemies that even someone as weak as him could safely defeat without risking his life. In that exact moment, the memory of Noriko's bitter words echoed vividly in his mind, reminding him that once a person truly confronts the harsh reality of their situation, all idealistic platitudes are exposed as hollow nonsense. Falling into complete silence, Junpei reflected deeply on her past actions, realizing that Noriko had likely felt utterly hopeless about her own weak status, which had driven her to leverage her feminine charm as a bargaining chip to secure protection among the strong. Regardless of her true motives or whether her past words were deliberate lies, he recognized that her choice was fundamentally practical. The undeniable reality of the world remained absolute. The powerless would always be trampled underfoot by those with power. Frustrated by his own lingering weakness and foolish thoughts, Junpei clutched his hair in deep anger, scolding himself for naively entertaining the fantasy that the next level would somehow offer a safer environment for a weakling like him. Recognizing the total absurdity of such wishful thinking, he sprinted toward the stone wall and began climbing upward with relentless, desperate determination. Being at level 1 with garbage stats, no specialized power, and 0 special requirements, he swore to himself that he would seize even the slimmest fraction of a chance at victory. Reaching the top platform once again, Junpei stood face to face with the undead king. His eyes burned with intense resolve as the towering monster stared back at him without a single trace of hesitation. As the undead king slowly closed the distance between them, Junpei held his ground firmly, silently urging the creature in his mind to come just a little closer. The moment the monster stepped into optimal range, Junpei exhaled a heavy breath and slammed his foot violently into the ground to anchor his movement. The undead king raised its massive scythe high into the air, poising the sharp blade to deliver a decisive strike. Letting out a fierce, ringing scream, Junpei launched himself high into the air, soaring directly above the approaching monster. Launching himself through the air directly above the undead king, Junpei offered a final, defiant roar as he soared. The monster reacted instantly, swinging its massive scythe with lethal speed and slashing Junpei across the forehead. Fresh blood sprayed wildly into the air, but Junpei paid the injury no mind and refused to stop his descent, focusing entirely on reaching the ground. The undead king watched his falling body closely, utterly bewildered by his strange trajectory and unable to comprehend his true intention. Mid-air, Junpei reflected silently on the creature's absolute ability to nullify incoming attacks. He realized that such a defense was meaningless, as he had never intended to execute a direct attack against the monster in the first place. The creature followed his downward movement intently, its glowing eyes locked onto his falling form. Junpei slammed hard onto the floor right next to the creature, the sheer force of his impact cracking the weakened stone foundation beneath them. In the next instant, the unstable floor shattered completely under their combined weight. A confident smirk formed on Junpei's face as the ground gave way, recognizing the fundamental weakness of the creature's absolute defense. He reasoned that the monster could only nullify damage from strikes it actively recognized as deliberate attacks. If it encountered an unexpected environmental hazard, its defense mechanism would fail entirely. The undead king plummeted into the abyss below, its fragile body instantly impaled upon the sharp stone spikes waiting at the bottom. Junpei crashed onto the lower ground, but despite his aching body, he quickly dragged himself toward the designated safe zone nearby. The moment he crossed into the glowing boundary, his severe wounds slowly began to close and heal. Looking back at the fallen monster, Junpei analyzed the underlying logic of the battle, concluding that past adventurers who encountered the creature during chaotic group fights likely used large explosions to collapse the floor and drop the monster onto the spikes below. Given the creature's fragile physical constitution, an unexpected fall onto deadly spikes was guaranteed to prove fatal. Imagining that others before him had devised similar tactical solutions brought a faint smile to his lips. He acknowledged that without the restorative power of the safe zone to heal his injuries, his bold gamble would have left him entirely hopeless. Yet he had successfully overcome the impossible obstacle. Just as he began to relax, Junpei froze in place as a sudden sensation washed over him. Looking down at his hands, he felt a surge of intense heat pouring directly into his body. Within moments, a glowing status window materializations before his eyes, announcing that his overall level had jumped directly to level 25. Junpei let out a quiet laugh as he realized he was absorbing a massive pool of experience points from the defeated boss. To his absolute astonishment, the numbers continued to skyrocket rapidly, climbing all the way to level 178 while granting him an incredible total of 885 unassigned status points. Standing up, he pondered how best to allocate such a massive pool of points to maximize his survival strength, stepping carefully toward the motionless remains of the monster. Recalling the ancient divine words he had heard previously, Junpei remembered that he had to defeat powerful enemies to harvest their unique skills. He wondered whether simple physical contact would trigger the extraction process. Reaching out, Junpei placed his hand directly upon the head of the undead king. Instantly, the monster's body began to emit a bright light, causing physical skill cards to condense out of thin air before him. Inspecting the newly generated items, Junpei was surprised to find modern weaponry among the drops, reasoning that while it seemed unusual for a fantasy dungeon, the item had likely been brought into this world from another dimension long ago. A physical firearm materialization directly in his hands. Among the floating skill cards, his eyes caught one conferring absolute resistance to all abnormal conditions, leaving him to ponder its immediate strategic value. Continuing to examine the floating cards, another specific item caught his attention. A skill card labeled as the Flesh of the Undead, which contained explicit instructions stating that it had to be consumed through a single bite. Junpei was struck by the incredible timing of the drop, recognizing that combining total status abnormality resistance with the consumption of the undead flesh presented him with a genuine path forward. Realizing that these two abilities together might actually grant him the power needed to escape the deadly dungeon, his eyes filled with absolute resolve as he picked up the card, causing the physical flesh of the undead to materialize directly in his hands. Holding the gruesome piece of rotting flesh, Junpei stared intently at it, falling into a tense, silent hesitation as he questioned whether such a horrific object could actually be ingested. Cold sweat trickled down his face as he confronted the horrifying moral gravity of the choice before him, asking himself whether he was truly prepared to abandon his very humanity to survive. Pausing to open his status window, he attempted to allocate his newly acquired status points, watching in awe as his core attributes began to rise dramatically. He checked his updated skill loadout, noting his baseline appraisal skill alongside his newly acquired complete abnormality resistance, which left him with 9 open skill slots remaining. Looking toward the dark path ahead, Junpei reminded himself that he had no way of knowing what terrifying dangers awaited him on the next level, making it impossible for him to lower his guard for even a moment. Although the prospect of escaping the dungeon was finally within reach, he recognized that his current odds of survival remained dangerously low if he hesitated. Casting his gaze back down at the rotting flesh in his hands, his face twisted in intense physical disgust, yet his eyes burned with an unwavering, desperate resolve. Overcoming his revulsion, Junpei opened his mouth wide and bit forcefully into the undead flesh, clenching his jaw tightly shut as nervous sweat drenched his face. Junpei commanded himself to refrain from vomiting, forcing his jaw to chew through the revolting mass of rotting meat as the fundamental choice echoed continuously within his mind. Faced with the choice to abandon his humanity or perish, he chose without hesitation to discard it entirely. He forced himself to take another bite, the sickening flavor overwhelming his senses, but the bitter memories of betrayal burned far sharper in his chest. Images of Kido and Noriko flashed through his mind, the classmates who had heartlessly betrayed him, casting him into the depths of the dungeon with the absolute expectation that he would die alone in the dark. A wave of intense, burning rage surged through him, fueling his resolve as he continued to force the vile flesh down his throat. He recognized that their actions were completely unforgivable, swearing to himself that he would never bestow mercy upon them. Gritting his teeth, Junpei shoved the final chunk of undead flesh into his mouth. As he chewed through the last horrific mouthful, vivid memories of Noriko and Kido smirking, scoffing, and looking down on him played on a loop in his mind. With a final, agonizing gulp, he swallowed the remaining piece. The flesh was completely consumed, and along with it vanished any remaining piece of his spirit that held hesitation, weakness, or mercy. A sudden, heavy silence settled over the chamber. For a long moment, Junpei stood motionless, until his gaze shifted forward, his eyes burning with absolute, uncontrollable emotion. Without uttering a single sound, he reached down, grabbed a strip of sturdy fabric, and ripped it apart with cold focus. He tied the cloth into a makeshift pouch, dark promises of revenge echoing silently within his heart as he fixated on the names of his betrayers. Holding the newly acquired firearm firmly in his grasp, he placed the weapon inside the cloth pouch and secured it tightly to his waist. With calm, steady hands, Junpei picked up the dark cloak of the defeated undead king and draped it over his shoulders. A tremor of absolute fury shook his voice as he vowed to hunt down every single person who had betrayed him, swearing that he would tear them all to pieces without a shred of pity. While sitting quietly upon the floor, the deity let out a small laugh as he watched the scene unfold, understanding exactly how the present situation had come to be. A woman stepped toward him and offered him his drink. Expressing his gratitude, the deity remarked on how truly extraordinary the young man was. The woman showed complete indifference to the observation, begging him to grant her death instead. Ignoring her desperate plea, the god pondered aloud about how far this human would manage to venture into the depths of the dungeon, smirking as he spoke the name Takeda Junpei. Deep within the cavernous dungeon, a colossal creature towered above Junpei. He activated his appraisal ability, causing a magical status window to immediately materialize before his eyes. The display revealed the creature's name as the Mammoth Beetle, classifying its danger level at rank A, accompanied by a brief summary detailing its nature. Observing the monster, Junpei reflected on his previous decision to invest heavily in his speed attribute, realizing it had been the correct choice. Without warning, the massive beetle launched a sudden, furious charge directly toward him. Had he not possessed high speed, that initial charge attack would have ended his life instantly. Furthermore, his enhanced agility had allowed him to locate the nearby safe zone much faster. Glancing down at the slate in his hands, Junpei quietly acknowledged that his survival was largely due to the guidance contained within the letter left behind by a meddlesome old man. A glowing image of the elderly man emerged once more from the letter, greeting Junpei with great enthusiasm and praising him as a rising hero for having successfully escaped from the terrifying undead king. The man explained that he wanted to offer a few valuable hints regarding the boss of this current floor. He pointed out that the heavily armored beetle was indeed the floor boss, possessing an exceptionally powerful defense and a habit of blindly ramming everything in its path. While it might be easy enough to dodge 1 or 2 charges, trying to defeat such a tough opponent while constantly dodging its attacks was virtually impossible. For that reason, the old man strongly advised sticking to the original plan of running away as fast as possible. Wishing Junpei well and expressing hope that they might meet again somewhere further down the line, the old man bade him farewell as the message faded. Junpei smirked at the advice. He considered that if his only goal was simple survival, escaping was certainly an appealing plan. However, he knew that if he relied entirely on fleeing whenever danger appeared, he would eventually stumble and fail in the future. He resolved that he had to seize every single opportunity to become stronger, no matter how difficult or tedious the process might be. 10 full hours passed as Junpei systematically carried out his strategy. Standing face to face with the colossal beast, he aimed his gun at it, reasoning that the monster simply possessed a high defensive stat rather than absolute invulnerability. He discharged his ammunition into the creature's tough hide before quickly retreating back into the safety of the safe zone to avoid retaliation. Opening his firearm, the spent casings dropped to the ground, and he reloaded the weapon with fresh bullets. He waited patiently for his mana reserves to regenerate before stepping out to fire upon the monster once again. Repeating this continuous cycle of shooting, retreating, regenerating, and reloading, Junpei's expression brightened with confidence as he realized he could easily defeat the powerful boss by camping safely inside the zone and slowly wearing down its strength through pure patience. 70 hours into the long and exhausting ordeal, the gigantic mammoth beetle finally collapsed onto the ground, completely lifeless. Relief washed over Junpei as the battle concluded, and the intense grinding left him feeling extremely hungry. He walked over to the monster's fallen corpse to check what loot had dropped. The moment his hand touched the creature, its massive body began to emit a bright glow, and 2 mystical cards materialized in the air before him. The first card was an item drop representing a legendary ranked unique piece of armor, while the second was a rare ranked skill card labeled Mammoth Beetle Flesh. Reviewing the details of the rewards, Junpei dismissed the defensive armor as useless for his needs, but decided he would eat the monster flesh to satisfy his growing hunger. At that very moment, observing the outcome from his distant vantage point, the god smirked to himself. He mused that while he fully expected Junpei to defeat the monster, the true question was how the young man planned to make his ultimate escape from the dungeon. Beside him, the woman continued her monotonous and desperate pleas for him to end her life. A short while later, Junpei stood directly in front of the heavy exit doors. He pushed them open and stepped inside, entering a completely different chamber. He flinched in immediate surprise as he realized he had stepped straight into another safe zone. However, his astonishment was cut short as a massive, dark shadow fell over him. Looking up, he discovered a giant monster with 3 heads towering over his position. Maintaining his composure despite the shocking encounter, Junpei calmly activated his appraisal skill once again. The newly appeared status window identified the legendary beast as a Cerberus, warning him that its danger level was set at the extreme mythical rank. Junpei froze in utter surprise before bursting into uncontrolled laughter, scoffing at the status description and questioning what a mythical rank monster even was, dismissing the legendary creature as nothing more than an ordinary dog. Glancing down, his eyes caught sight of the letter beside him, and as he picked it up, the image of the elderly man materialized once more to address the dire predicament. The old man warned that facing such a mythological beast was sheer madness that could only end in a one-sided slaughter due to the creature's blinding speed and razor-sharp teeth. He cautioned that even if Junpei attempted to stay within the safe zone while launching ranged attacks, the beast possessed enough agility to dodge every single effort, adding a specific warning that the creature stepping backwards served as a clear indicator of an impending strike. A nervous sweat broke out across Junpei's face as the man concluded that the situation was thoroughly grim. He advised Junpei to immediately devise an escape plan, acknowledging that even a successful retreat would likely cost him a few limbs, before wishing him luck and bidding him farewell one last time. Instead of despairing, a confident smirk formed on Junpei's lips as he realized that defeating such a high-ranked threat would yield a massive amount of experience points, taking it as a sign that luck was truly on his side. Though uncertain whether his agility could match the monster's speed or if his strategy would prove effective, he resolved to test his capabilities firsthand. Stepping carefully beyond the boundary of the safe zone to evaluate his movement, the Cerberus lunged toward him in the blink of an eye. Junpei managed to evade the lethal attack just in time, bolstering his confidence as he realized his impressive stat of 1390 agility was more than capable of keeping pace. With his speed confirmed, he taunted the three-headed beast, daring it to approach so he could crush it. The Cerberus stood motionless for a brief moment before its surrounding aura shifted dramatically. As Junpei wondered what the creature was preparing to do, the beast unleashed a deafening howl that generated a massive shockwave, blasting Junpei backward and inflicting intense agony. Thick smoke billowed from the monster's three jaws as a system notification window appeared, identifying the devastating ability as Dead Howling. Realizing the severity of the unexpected attack, Junpei found that while his passive resistance to status ailments allowed him to retain movement in his head, his arms and legs were completely paralyzed. As the Cerberus slowly stalked closer to finish him off, Junpei frantically commanded his body to move, desperately chanting the thought in his mind. Knowing his resistance trait was still actively fighting the ailment, he reasoned that inflicting a severe shock directly to his brain through intense physical pain would forcibly shatter the paralysis effect. Just as the monster opened its jaws to strike and the surrounding light seemed to snap away, Junpei let out a low chuckle. He stood tall before the creature and burst into wild laughter, having devised a swift, brutal method to generate the required pain. Sticking his tongue out between his teeth, Junpei bit down with extreme force. Blood sprayed wildly from his mouth just as the Cerberus reared back, preparing to deliver its final attack. Blood gushes continuously from Junpei's wounded tongue as the massive Cerberus towers over his motionless body, letting out a deafening roar. Experiencing the overwhelming wave of self-inflicted pain, Junpei realizes with grim satisfaction that the severe physical shock succeeded in shattering the paralysis effect holding him captive. Raising his bare hand toward the three-headed beast as an open invitation, he watches as the Cerberus lunges forward, sinking its massive fangs deep into his limb and violently tearing his arm apart. Crimson spray bursts from Junpei's mouth and body as agonizing pain shoots through every nerve. Stumbling backward, he dashes away to put distance between himself and the monster, coughing up thick crimson drops with every ragged breath he takes. Standing a short distance away, the Cerberus chews on the severed flesh, blood dripping heavily from its dark jaws. As crimson continues to spill violently from his lips and his mutilated shoulder, Junpei is engulfed by a depth of agony that transcends simple physical pain. The sheer physical torment is utterly drowned out by the deep, agonizing ache filling his heart, leaving him to wonder why he must endure such unbearable suffering. Within the chaos of his mind, a single dark word begins to echo over and over with absolute clarity. He feels a consuming urge to kill every living entity within this terrible dungeon, to kill Kido, to destroy all of his former friends, to eliminate Noriko, and to slaughter everyone who betrayed him. Suddenly, the blinding rage clears, leaving his mind sharp and focused once more. In an astonishing turn of events, his completely severed arm rapidly regenerates, growing back to its whole form in an instant. Standing unharmed, Junpei lets out a quiet sigh as he inspects his newly restored arm. Looking toward the three-headed mythical beast, he wonders aloud how his flesh tasted and whether the creature enjoyed its meal. A dark, confident smirk spreads across his lips as he questions if it is truly wise for the beast to stand there doing nothing. Right on cue, the Cerberus lets out a weak, pained growl as its massive body begins to tremble violently. Staggering unsteadily for a brief moment, the legendary creature completely loses its footing and crashes heavily onto the ground in front of him. Realizing that his poison-infused blood has brought the mythical beast to the absolute brink of death. Observing the monster's collapse, Junpei smiles broadly. Slowly getting back to his feet, he offers a mock apology to the fallen monster, admitting that this was his first time utilizing his toxic flesh in combat. He acknowledges that even a legendary mythical rank entity like the Cerberus cannot withstand the deadly inner damage caused by consuming a human limb laced with concentrated poison. However, knowing that a beast of this magnitude might possess incredible natural healing capabilities, Junpei realizes he cannot afford to waste time or fool around. Raising his firearm, he aims directly at the creature's head and pulls the trigger, but the bullet merely leaves a shallow, insignificant scratch on its thick hide. Recognizing that standard physical attacks are entirely ineffective against its formidable natural defense, Junpei decides to try a far more brutal tactic. Without hesitation, Junpei bites hard into his own wrist, causing blood to gush freely from the fresh wound. Holding his bleeding wrist directly over the monster's nose, he takes advantage of the fact that a canine monster possesses an exceptionally sensitive sense of smell, dripping his toxic blood straight into its nasal passages to intensify and prolong the agonizing poison effect. Next, he manually extracts the gunpowder-filled bullets from his gun and arranges them carefully on a small pile of dry twigs gathered from the floor. Picking up a heavy stone, he slams it forcefully against the ammunition, causing the gunpowder to ignite with a sharp, cracking sound that sparks a small, bright flame. Smirking at the successful ignition, Junpei uses the fire to set the inside of the monster's nose ablaze. The Cerberus growls in distress at the sudden sensation of fire, prompting a mocking scoff from Junpei as he watches the creature writhe. Smoke rises into the air as the fire consumes the monster, gradually melting its thick skin away until the creature finally succumbs to the flames and dies. Stepping forward to touch the scorched, lifeless remains of the beast, 3 rewards materialize before him in the form of glowing drop cards containing the skill Dead Howling along with the items Beast Flesh and Beast Fang. Inspecting the Dead Howling card, Junpei tosses it aside with disdain, concluding that a skill capable of only affecting targets weaker than himself is completely useless. Looking at the Beast Flesh card, he sighs with disgust, knowing the monster meat will likely taste terrible, though he accepts that he must eat it to maintain his strength. However, the item drop card containing the Beast Fang causes him to pause in surprise. Upon holding the card, it glows brightly before transforming into an actual physical Fang in his hand. Junpei smiles with satisfaction at his good fortune, recognizing that the sharp, durable tooth will serve as an exceptional knife for his journey forward. Meanwhile, high above the dungeon inside the deity's headquarters, the god suddenly gasps in realization, remembering that he completely forgot to explain the proper function of the mysterious box to Junpei. Raising his voice, the god calls for his attendant, Chenny, ordering her to head down into the dungeon to explain the mechanics of the object directly to the young man. Chenny responds by asking if the human will kill her if she approaches him, to which the god casually replies that he will consider that possibility later, adding a compliment about her strange outfit and noting how crazy she looks in her current attire. Unfazed by the remark, Chenny accepts the task and prepares to depart. Back in the dungeon, Junpei forces himself to consume the raw monster flesh, muttering in disgust at the repulsive flavor and angrily questioning whoever claimed that monster meat was delicious. Finishing his meal, he walks toward the exit and steps through the heavy doors into the next level. Surveying the unfamiliar surroundings, Junpei whispers in confusion as he notices that the new floor appears identical to the previous one, offering an immediate safe zone the moment he steps through the threshold. Pausing in his tracks, he begins to wonder if this entire floor might be designated as a single, massive safe zone. Scanning his eyes across the quiet area, he searches for any sign of movement, utterly puzzled by the complete absence of enemy monsters. Out of nowhere, a woman appeared directly in front of Junpei, causing him to flinch in complete surprise. Standing cautiously, he watched as the woman observed him and softly muttered that he must be the person she was looking for, before addressing him formally by his full name, Takeda Junpei. Junpei immediately attempted to use his appraisal ability to analyze her. However, to his surprise, no status information appeared. He realized she was not a dungeon monster at all, but rather an ordinary human woman, though he could not help but wonder about the strange nature of her outfit. The woman introduced herself politely as Chenny, explaining that she was a personal servant to the deity overseeing the dungeon. When Junpei asked if she meant the unstable god watching over him, Chenny responded with a sudden, relentless barrage of harsh insults toward her master, describing the deity as deeply disturbed, repulsive, selfish, ugly, corrupt, and completely foul. Overwhelmed by her intense tirade, Junpei interrupted her, assuring her that he understood her point. Chenny then promised to keep everything he had said a complete secret between them. Junpei frantically corrected her, clarifying that those terrible descriptions had come entirely from her own mouth and not his, before taking a deep breath to calm his nerves and bring the conversation back on track. Chenny explained that she had been sent to deliver an important tutorial lesson that her master had previously forgotten to mention. Calling out the word for a box, a floating container instantly materialized out of thin air beside her. She explained that Junpei could easily summon a similar container at any time simply by uttering the command word. This magical storage container would allow him to store and retrieve any loot or items he acquired during his journey through the dungeon. She further detailed that every individual in this world possessed their own unique storage box, with its overall capacity, shape, and size determined by the owner's total magical power. As long as a person was powerful enough, virtually anything could be placed inside, regardless of whether the object was living or non-living. However, Chenny noted a crucial limitation. A target could not be forced into the storage box against its will. Therefore, if Junpei ever wished to capture and store live monsters, he would first have to completely enslave or subjugate them. Curious to test the newly revealed mechanics, Junpei silently repeated the command in his mind. Instantly, a magical container materialized in the air beside him, confirming that he had successfully summoned his own personal storage space. He pondered whether such a container could be used directly in combat situations, but Chenny explained that its effectiveness in battle depended entirely on the creativity of the user, as most individuals utilized it strictly for storage purposes. Concluding the lesson, Chenny declared the tutorial complete and asked if he had any remaining questions. Junpei briefly considered asking her about her unusual choice of clothing, but decided against it, offering a brief negative response instead. Chenny fixed him with a sharp, suspicious look, noting that she had felt as though he was scanning her improperly with his eyes. She admitted that she had assumed he was going to question her strange attire, but concluded she must have simply imagined it. Bidding him farewell, Chenny stated that she would be taking her leave, and in a split second, she vanished completely from his sight. Junpei let out a heavy sigh of exhaustion, shaking his head at her bizarre behavior and remarking on how troubled she seemed, though he conceded it was entirely expected of someone serving that strange deity. Just as he relaxed, another object caught his attention on the ground. Picking up the familiar slate, he recognized another letter left behind by the mysterious old man. As before, the projection of the elderly man emerged from the letter, greeting Junpei with cheerful enthusiasm. The man laughed and wondered aloud if Junpei had successfully fled from the terrifying Cerberus on the previous floor. He went on to explain that since Junpei had safely reached this new level, he would soon discover that actual people were living here. Junpei's eyebrows furrowed in confusion at the unexpected revelation. The old man elaborated that this entire floor was designated as a massive safe zone, free from hostile monsters. He shared that many adventurers who had previously faced traumatic life and death situations in the lower levels had chosen to give up climbing the dungeon, choosing instead to settle down and live peaceful lives on this peaceful floor, a decision the old man found completely understandable. The man then posed a question to Junpei, asking what path he intended to choose for his future. He pointed out that Junpei could easily locate one of the small local villages and live out the rest of his days in safety and comfort. Junpei fell completely silent, considering the offer carefully. The old man added that personally, he preferred to keep moving forward into deeper floors because he disliked socializing with people and thrived in solitude. Wishing Junpei well once again, the old man bade him farewell as the glowing projection faded away. After the message disappeared, Junpei muttered to himself, realizing that the strange woman from earlier did not actually reside on this peaceful floor. Suddenly, his eyes caught sight of another figure standing a short distance away. Becoming instantly alert, Junpei wondered nervously who this new individual could be and whether she was one of the local villagers mentioned in the letter. The woman called out to him with a bright, friendly greeting, noting that it was her first time seeing him in the area. Observing the path he had walked from, she asked if he had recently arrived from the dangerous upper levels of the dungeon. Junpei cautiously confirmed her suspicion and asked for her identity. With a warm smile, the woman introduced herself as Katarina, explaining that she was a resident of the nearby village located in the valley of this safe floor, before offering him a polite welcome. Junpei stammered slightly in response, introducing himself by name as Takeda Junpei. Katarina smiled sweetly upon hearing his name. As Junpei observed her, he fell deep into thought, realizing that while she appeared genuinely friendly and far more normal than the deity's servant, he could not afford to drop his guard completely in such a place. Katarina then broke the silence, stating that while it might seem sudden, she had an important request to ask of him. Without warning, Katarina shouted her desperate plea, begging him to go out with her, causing Junpei to freeze completely in stunned disbelief. Realizing her phrasing was incorrect, she rapidly corrected herself, blurting out that she meant intimate relations instead, causing Junpei's eyes to widen even further as total speechlessness took hold of him. Holding his head in exasperation, Junpei found himself deeply questioning whether every single woman in this strange world suffered from a lack of basic mental stability. Offering a quick apology for her chaotic outburst, Katarina's tone shifted dramatically as she insisted that her intent was entirely serious, explaining that the local community was currently facing a dire and dangerous situation. She asked if he would be willing to accompany her somewhere while she explained the circumstances along the way, to which Junpei offered a brief, guarded agreement. Katarina expressed her sincere gratitude, though her welcoming expression quickly faded as a deep, troubled darkness fell across her face.